Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm very, very excited to be here for my yearly debut author talk. And this year, I'm very lucky to have Dorabji, Laurie Dove, Jakob Kerr, and Karissa Chen joining us to talk about their journeys to being published. And I think it's going to be a fabulous talk. It always is, and I always learn something new. Before we get started, though, I just want to say a couple things. One is thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programming. We couldn't do this fun stuff without them. And I'd like to thank our authors who allowed us to share this program with other libraries because, when libraries work together, we make magic. So that's how these kind of things sometimes come about. You can buy signed books by our authors from Aesop's Fable, our favorite indie bookstore, and I'll put a link to that in the chat, or I might just send it out in an email afterwards so you all can pay attention tonight and not worry about that. But you know, signed books are gold. That's all I'm going to say. All right. So I'm not going to do introductions. I'm going to let our authors talk about themselves. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If you just want to chat with each other, feel free to do that within the chat. And there is an emoji button somewhere. If you can find it, feel free to use those to let us know how you're feeling. So I'm going to just go in a circle. Tara, tell us about yourself and your book, which is amazing, by the way.
Aw, thank you so much. I'm Tara Dorabji, the author of Call Her Freedom, and I'm the mother of twins, a storyteller. So I've done documentary film and also a poet, and spent 14 years creating Call Her Freedom, and am really passionate about stories that are censored and silenced and giving space to those and supporting storytellers also in sharing their own stories in their own terms. And so grateful to be with you all here this evening.
Okay. So I'm just going to say that Call Her Freedom, I'm just reading from your bio, is a sweeping family saga following one woman's struggle to protect her culture and her family amidst the backdrop of a military occupation. We're going to get into that a bit more as we go through tonight. Laurie, tell us about yourself and your book.
Well, thank you for having me and along with these other wonderful panelists. And I'm so excited to visit with everyone tonight. I'm a career journalist. I'm talking to you from Kansas. And my first novel is a suspenseful mystery about an indigenous woman who returns to the tribal reservation where her father was raised, but she has had no cultural connection there. And so while she navigates these things, she's really at rock bottom after her own daughter's death. And she finds herself really embroiled in this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women that is happening both fictionally in the story and unfortunately in real life. And it plays out from there with some magical realism and other things that introduce a lot of ambiguity because life is like that sometimes. So I'm happy to be here and excited to speak with all of you.
Laurie, did I see on Instagram that your book just won an award somewhere?
Hmm. Maybe. I don't know. It's been a little hectic in the best way. So it was reviewed in the New York Times and the Seattle Times. The Washington Post just named the audiobook one of three that you should listen to. And it was USA Today instant bestseller. So it's had this really wonderful reception. And what I didn't expect has been my favorite thing, which is this reader community that's really built around this book. And that's been the best part of it.
Amazing. And Jacob.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacob. I am dialing in from the Northwest where I live with my wife and two kids. Hopefully, you won't see either of those children at any point during tonight's event if they respect the closed door to the office, but they're very young, so we'll see. I am a recovering lawyer, I like to joke, and have spent most of my career in the tech industry. My book is called Dead Money. It's a mystery thriller that's set in the tech world. The hotshot founder of a big buzzy startup is murdered in his office, and he leaves behind billions in dead money that's frozen in his will. My main character is a fixer for venture capitalists, and she gets assigned to this very high-profile murder investigation. And the story has a lot of twists. Everybody has their own agenda, including the main character, Mackenzie, and that's Dead Money.
Thank you. I actually really, at some point, I'm going to ask you about how you only were a driver of an ice cream truck for one disastrous afternoon. But I'll come back to that because I do want to hear from Karissa.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I am calling in from Taiwan, where it's 8 in the morning right now. Um, my book is Homeseeking. It's about two childhood sweethearts who grew up in Shanghai during the Sino-Japanese War, and they fall in love. But before they can kind of get married and live the life that they want to live, they get separated because of the Chinese Civil War. One of them gets enlists in the army, and they don't meet again until they are in their 70s in LA. And so the book actually follows their two narratives. One goes backwards in time, the other one goes forwards in time. They meet in the middle, and we get to see what has happened to them over the years, over like 70 years, and whether or not they have a chance at being together.
Wow. It sounds like the Notebook only.
Only with war and displacement.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe not Ryan Gosling. Um, Okay, so we are going to dig into your books a little bit, and certainly, if there are any questions from our audience, I will be asking those. But I want to go back a little bit first to where, sort of your origin stories. How did you get to be where you are right now? So, Laurie, let me ask you first, and then I'll go around in the circle. Were you always a reader? Did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Yes, I was an early reader and an early writer, and I knew immediately that that's what I wanted to do. I had this moment. I grew up on a farm, and I had this moment where I was reading Black Beauty before I was even in school. And I thought, oh, a book and a horse. Like, this is my entire world in one place. And that's when I knew. I ended up becoming a journalist, which felt like important work because I loved telling other people's stories, and I still do. And I feel like some of that has really come across in Mask of the Deer Woman, because I'm able to share some real life statistics about missing and murdered Indigenous women within this fictional realm of the story. And that was meaningful to me. And I
Mhm.
hope that in some small way that has an impact in what's really occurring.
Mhm. Jacob, how about you? Reader, writer?
Yeah, I was I was the kid who was always reading a paperback during, dinners out at restaurants or on family vacations. Always was avoiding my relatives, just had my face buried in between the pages somewhere in a corner of the house. So yeah, younger than I probably should have been. I was reading a lot of just sort of big commercial thrillers and suspense novels and that kind of thing. And I actually remember, when I was like 11 or 12, I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and it just kind of similar to, A Story in a Horse. It was a book and a puzzle, and I was like, wow, these two things kind of came together. It felt like I was assembling a puzzle as I read, and that was my first inkling of like, oh wow, this is what a book can be. I would love to try my hand at this someday.
That is one of my very favorite Agatha Christie's. Karissa?
Yeah, similar to everybody else, I also was an early reader. I think I started reading at 3, and my mom likes to tell a story now that I have a book out that when I was around 4, I would staple the pages together and I would like draw, and write little stories. And when I was 4, I came home to my mom and I said, when I grow up, I want to be a bookmaker because I didn't know the word author. And so that's what I would do. I would just like write as soon as I could write, I started writing, and I knew I always wanted to be a writer.
Hmm.
Yeah, but like for me, the big book that first really made it impact me was when I think I was in 3rd grade, and I read A Wrinkle in Time. And I just remember like the ending, like blowing my mind, my little mind being like, wow, it's love. And it was so moving to me at that age. And that's something I wanted to do.
Mhm. I love hearing about your first books that made that impact on you all. Tara, how about you?
Yeah, as I'm listening to Karissa, I remember when I was little, we had our own little library. Like we played library. That was one of our games where we'd like check out books and stuff. And for me, I think the moment that I claimed myself as a writer and artist was probably when I was in elementary school. I think I was in I forget what grade, like second or third. And this kid made me really mad. And I remember being in bed, like so angry, I couldn't sleep. And then I got out of bed and I wrote this poem called The Backstabber. And I just remember it going through me and being like the emotion on the page. And what was interesting is I read it at breakfast the next day. My parents put it up on the wall and like celebrated it. And so I think that's been a huge part of it. And like Laurie as well, I've also done a lot of radio journalism. So leaning into storytelling as a way to shine a light on truth, and particularly with Call Her Freedom, which is inspired by Indian occupied Kashmir, being able to weave stories that are deeply censored into a fictional realm has been really powerful.
Mhm. And can make such an impact as we've talked about from other everybody. So Jacob, I want to ask, how did you get on your journey to actually be a writer though? Like, did you have one day in college say, I need an agent? What did that look like for you?
No, it was much messier than that. I wish there was like a, eureka moment. No, I think just professionally, throughout my career, I've always occupied roles that were very, writing intensive, whether that was law or journalism in college, and then just as a, strategic communications, during most of my professional career. I always just had the idea kind of like swirling in my head that I wanted to give it a try. I never, I didn't have any formal training or anything like that. I just kind of decided this has been rattling around in my head long enough that I need to get it out at some point and see what happens. And that was how I kind of began trying novel writing. And when I started, I realized, I really am enjoying this. I'm enjoying the process of it, and this feels like I'm doing the right thing. So, yeah,
But what was the first impetus? Like, when you started writing, but did you then like
sure,
what was a step to get you to
sure,
actually go towards, I'm going to publish a book?
yeah. Well, for Dead Money, it's a story that takes place in the tech industry. I worked in tech for a very long time, and in the sort of mid 2010s, you had a lot of founders of companies like Uber and WeWork and Theranos that were coming under a lot of heavy scrutiny for their behavior, and rightly so. And that was scrutiny from their employees, from investors, from media, and they were really unpopular. And at some point, I just remember thinking, sitting at the office and thinking, if one of these founders got murdered right now, there'd be like a million suspects. And it kind of connected back to reading all the mysteries that I had read when I was a kid. And I thought, wow, I could sort of, create that kind of novel, but set it in this setting, and it would really be something. So that's when I started outlining and coming up with the broader idea, and then just started putting pen to paper.
Mhm. Wow, the murder of that CEO must have really hit you hard.
That I got a lot of emails about that when it happened. And it was a weird, yeah, it was a weird. There have been a number of weird news stories over the last 6 months to year that, people say, "Oh, your book seems somewhat timely." So,
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely. I think all of these books are very timely. Carissa, how about you? What was your impetus to actually put pen to paper and go towards publishing?
Yeah, so, I guess if we're talking about this specific book, the impetus for the book was actually when my grandfather passed away, and we had been going through his things, and I found this photograph of him crying in front of his mother's grave. And it like really moved me because, my grandfather wasn't somebody who really cried. I didn't, he was kind of a stoic Chinese man. And I like really wanted to know what the story behind this was. So I did some research and I realized that his story wasn't like really unique. Like there were 2 million people that fled from China to Taiwan after the Chinese Civil War. And, um, a lot of them were separated from their families for decades, if not forever, because, they thought they were going to go back to China, but then the communists won. And so they weren't able to go back. And that was what had happened to my grandfather. He was 19 years old. He was separated from his family forever. And I really wanted to tell this story. At that time, I had finished my MFA, and so before that, I guess to backtrack a little bit, like I was supposed to be on like a track to get my MBA, and I realized I wanted to be a writer instead. I was taking these extension classes, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm in love with writing, and this is what I'm going to do. So at that point in time, I just finished an MFA that my parents were very like, what are you going to do with this? um, and I just started writing about this situation. I started doing research around the Chinese Civil War, and yeah, this book eventually came out of me, which I thought was a short story, and is now 500 pages. So it's not a short story anymore.
That's definitely not a short story.
No.
Getting close to Donna Tartt territory. Tara, how about you? What was the beginning of your writing journey look like?
So it's interesting. It was when I took a workshop at Voices of Our Nations Arts Foundation with ZZ Packer. And before then, even though I'd written my poem and done all of this writing for a decade, I was teaching young people poetry and writing in the schools. I didn't call myself a writer. And so that workshop really gave me the community and also the conviction to call myself a writer. And so at that point, I decided to go to Kashmir, which is one of the world's most densely militarized lands. And really Call Her Freedom was born from that experience. And at the time, I had twins, they were 4. And so I was planning a family trip to India. So my dad's from Bombay. So India is the occupying force, and decided to take a side trip into Kashmir. And I think I was more terrified of the plane trip with twins than actually visiting an occupied land. And when I landed in Srinagar, that's actually when the state was verifying mass civilian graves. And so I was talking to a lot of women that lost their fathers, their sons, their brothers. And one woman, she told me when she visited the graves, she said she actually wanted to crawl inside and hug the bones because they were the 10,000 missing men, brothers, fathers. And so I was deeply struck by the power, conviction, and resilience of the women and those in Kashmir, the storytellers. And so that really kept me on my path for the next. It took me 14 years to create Call Her Freedom. And I remember one of the women told me that when she knew people outside of the region could hear her story, it gave her hope. And so that was one of the driving forces along the way.
So that's the difference between a writer and a librarian, because I've been to Srinagar and Kashmir and it never occurred to me to write a book about it. So it's amazing like how somebody can see it in such a different way because they have that I don't know, passion maybe. Laurie?
I love hearing these answers from all of you. It's so interesting. And I love hearing about that inspiration. For me, I was a career journalist, so I was writing all the time, but I always knew that this was the dream, that I wanted to write fiction. And so I needed, though, the structure that would force me to set aside time to do that. So it wasn't always at the bottom of my list every day. So I entered a master's program and I graduated with a degree in literature and creative writing from Harvard when I was 50. And I felt like I fully stepped into my life and wrote this book it started as a short story during that program. And I wrote the ending first. And in the ending, there was this really compelling character, Carrie Starr, who's the main character of this book. And I thought I could spend years with this character. There's so much to her. She's complex and interesting, and all of these things that the women in my life actually are. And so I really wanted that to be representative of the people who, as Tara said, have that resilience, that get up every day through terrible experiences and do it anyway. And that's really where this book begins for her as a character. And I did the rest of it backward too. So I wrote the manuscript and was submitting to agents, but I happened to see this call for unagented submissions at Berkeley and imprint of Penguin Random House. It was the first time they'd opened it. It was open for about 10 days. And I had everything ready and I sent it off, and I didn't really think anything more about it because I thought, I'm going to write books for the rest of my life. One of them will stick eventually. I didn't know if it would be this one. And I was pleased and surprised to have a request from them for the manuscript. And from there, I was able to connect with an agent that I really aligned with. And here we are. And it's Mask of the Deer Woman is now a series. And the second book will come out in 2026.
I love that you already know that. Amazing. Chris, I'm going to start with you on this question because writing is difficult and it doesn't always pay off. And you all have very different backgrounds. So I'm wondering for you, did you get any pushback from family, friends, anybody that's like, you want to be a writer or what?
Yeah, like I said, my parents really wanted me to get an MBA. I was working as a publicist at an agency, a New York agency at the time. And, my dad was like, you should go to business school. Like, that's what's gonna, if that's what's gonna be good for your career, whatever. And so I was like, all right, I guess. And I was studying for my GMATs and everything. And I was taking writing classes at the same time. And, that's when I found out that there was such a thing called an MFA. And I was like, well, just for fun, I'm just gonna look up what these programs are. And when I looked it up, I was like, oh my God, this sounds so fun. You just get to like go to class and read and write, and like that's what you do in school. Like that sounds amazing. Why would I go to business school? That is so boring. Um, and so I switched tactics. I applied for my MFAs. I got into school and I told my parents, I was like, I'm not doing the MBA anymore. I'm going to get an MFA. And they were like, what is that? Why would you spend money to learn to do something you already know how to do? Like you know how to write. And what is the point? Like what happens when you get out? Like do you get a job? Because like, you go to medical school, you go to law school, you come out and you like can find a job, but like what do you do with an MFA? And I was like, yeah, it's gonna make me a better writer or something. And then so they were very worried. But I think now that I have a book out, they are like, okay. I mean, it took a very long time to get this book out, so I think they were very worried for a very long time. But now they're like, okay, we see, like you did what you said you were gonna do. You wrote a book, so
Oh, good. They're goal oriented. I get that.
yeah, they're definitely goal oriented.
How about you, Tara? Did you get any pushback?
No, I mean, everyone's been super supportive. I do not have an MFA, so basically did most of my writing outside of work time, so have held different types of day jobs. Most recently, I was a co-founder of the Center for Cultural Power, so raising funds for artists, activists to change culture. And so, that didn't exist as a thing. I mean, it existed, but the type of institution we founded in 2020 didn't exist 10 years before, even as a possibility. And so I think a lot of my career has been following my passion, really working to expose injustice and bring art together with that, along with really following love, I think has been a big part of my whole journey. And so I've been really blessed with, my dad just turned 80. And so he's just had such a fun time with the publication of the book. And it's been really special to share that with him. And, my mom passed away before the book was published, but her friends all came to my launch and like sat in the center. And so it's been so beautiful. And yeah, just a real honor. And I would say, I mean, I've had a day job through for much of the process, right? And so sometimes separating my art from my income generation has been really essential for the type of creative freedom that I've had. And yeah.
So good. Laurie?
I have had so much support. It's been overwhelming in the best way. And I was just telling my family yesterday that I feel like, at the end of your life, if you're lucky enough, you have all of these people come and say hopefully wonderful things about you, but you're not necessarily there to hear it, or at least I don't know. But here it's been happening. It feels like I've had this wonderful tour of being able to reconnect with people, and then to have these really beautiful conversations with people that have read the book. And we've maybe known each other for many, many years, but something in the book has allowed them to have these different kind of conversations with me about things that they've been through or experienced. And that reader community and the support of my family and my friends, and I have writer friends that came in from all over the country for my book launch, which was I was so honored by that. And as Tara was saying, my parents were here along this whole writing journey, from this, strange little child always, writing things in a notebook, to here today. And I'm so happy that they are here to see it finally come true.
Wonderful. Jakob, I'm glad you're the last one for me to ask this question to, because you came from the tech world. You were a lawyer. I'm not actually sure what everybody else did for their day jobs, but was it hard for you to like make that switch over, or have you completely, to writing as opposed to raking in the bucks?
Yeah, writing definitely has not raked in the bucks. So that's, but I think, no writer goes into it for that purpose. No, I started writing books just as kind of a side thing, as like escapism almost from my day job. I think that's probably true for a lot of folks. It was just something else I could disappear into. My friends and family were always extremely supportive, even Dead Money is not it's the first book I've had published. It's not the first thing that I've written, right? Some of the things I wrote earlier were quite bad, and some of my friends read them anyway. So, there's been a lot of support from friends and family. That's been great. Um, for Dead Money, I started writing it when we had two boys under the age of 2. So the whole thing was kind of like an out of body experience. I mean, there are stretches of it I don't even remember. I was grabbing, writing sections between diaper changes and after naps, and just sort of writing wherever I could. And that was really challenging. It was very hard, but I'm also very grateful for it, because it sort of grounded me, and it reminded me like what was actually important in my life at all times. And it also, it never allowed me to get stuck in my own head too much, right? I couldn't be precious about my writing time or my writing process. It was just, whenever I was able to find some time, I would get to it. So yeah, a lot of family support. None of that writing time could have happened without a very supportive family network, and you know, yeah, friends and family who have kind of just been there the whole time.
Mhm. Excellent. So I'm going to start asking some of the questions from our audience. Joseph asks, you're all writing from your backgrounds and still quite young. Thoughts about writing a memoir? But I want to add to that the question of, why did you choose to write fiction as opposed to nonfiction? Because all of you could have, given the stories that you told in your background. So Tara, I'm going to start with you on that. Thoughts about writing a memoir, but also nonfiction.
Yeah, I think I definitely did some auto fiction in the beginning, and I know there's writers that do that all the time. But for me, I had to take that out, and I do write nonfiction, and then it's about my life. And the radio journalism was amazing because I could capture people's voices and share it. Documentary film, people in their own places, homes, community. And that was a beautiful and necessary form. The fiction I love because it's so expansive. And I chose to create a world. It's inspired by Indian occupied Kashmir, but by creating a fictional area, I allow folks that maybe would be too close or wouldn't even enter the world otherwise to come in. And then you can also see the patterns. So I love fiction for that. And I would say I have my next fiction novel on my mind. Maybe I'll play and dabble with graphic novels. Even I have some visions for public performance before I would get to the memoir. So I have creative projects stacked.
Oh my gosh, I love graphic novels. I think they tell such a wonderful story. Um, Lori, how about you? Why fiction? You had mentioned this earlier, is that you do really love
Yeah.
fiction. So,
I do. Well, and I think a lot of that just stems out of the experience and rhythm of being a reader. And I read everything that I can get my hands on. And so that really awoke in me this idea that I could explore these really big questions in a fictional way that touch on some real life things that are happening that we could be more aware of, but in a way that draws people into it, hopefully, that might not have otherwise learned about these things. And so that expansive nature, as Tara said, is really attractive about being able to write fiction. And I like it for the exploratory ideas of it, where I can ask of my characters or even of myself or the people around me all of these what if questions. What if this? What if that? And then to be able to really carry, as I'm writing, I carry on thought auditions where, I'll say, oh, what if this? And then I'll go down that road for a while and think, okay, and, I'm going to back up and then I might try a different what if. But that process is so interesting. And Jacob mentioned earlier, this interest in puzzles, and I think that's what this is for me. Writing these types of books is, how do I put all of those pieces together in a way that not only is the closest thing to what I want to put out in the world, but is also a way that translates that to readers. And the distance from the head to the page, I think, is the most difficult bridge to get across sometimes. So I think it's a fascinating process, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to get better at it.
mhm. Jacob.
Well, first, I think my memoir would be extremely boring. So I don't, I don't think anybody actually wants to read that. Um, no, for me, I think it's just a reflection of what I always loved reading myself as a kid. I was always just really captivated by story and narrative, and I've Dead Money includes a lot of discussion of themes, like ambition and, some of my feelings on capitalism writ large and the sort of pros and cons of the tech industry and how it's shaped our modern world. But it always just felt more natural for me to put those inside of a kind of entertaining package, right? To find a way to tell a story with those. I think, there are tons of nonfiction. There's been a lot of nonfiction written about the tech industry, and I think it's, pretty easy to find, and very talented writers have covered it. I really wanted to kind of take some of those core stories and like mystery thriller sort of frameworks that I grew up with and inject them into the setting that I had worked in professionally.
Mhm. Thank you. Karissa, I know that I distracted you a little bit, but question about writing fiction versus nonfiction.
Yeah, so I have actually written a bunch of personal essays. I love writing personal essays. In some ways, I find nonfiction in that sense, or to write about myself, a little bit easier because, I don't have to make anything up. I know like what happened in my life, right? So it's more straightforward in some ways. It's more about then like how do I curate it so that what's meaningful rises to the top. But fiction has always been my first love. It's, I love the expansive nature, as other people have said, of fiction. And I think also for myself, sometimes I can see things a little more clearly when it's fiction. There's a depersonalization that happens. And it feels like, that distance allows me to tell the story with a little bit more clarity, and a little bit more, I can explore a little bit more. So, especially writing something like this, which, covers this large swath of time, and, a lot of it is stuff that, isn't taught in American history books, a lot of history that I didn't grow up knowing. I wanted to cover a lot of information. And I did think about like, okay, well, I could tell my grandfather's story, from just doing some research and, doing it as a nonfiction thing. But I felt like I would be missing so many pieces then because I would have to do so much guesswork about things that I hadn't lived through, and that didn't feel fair. Whereas with, fiction, I could do all the research and then I could kind of combine it and synthesize it into this big sort of sweeping novel that encompasses all of the research and all the themes that I wanted to talk about. So especially for this project, fiction felt like the right vehicle to tell the story that I want to tell.
I also think, just from my own perspective, that nonfiction can be a little bit intimidating to some people, and that fiction actually makes difficult stories much more accessible to the mainstream. So next question, Laurie, now that Karissa has mentioned research, once you had your idea, how did you research it so you could actually, write your book?
Yes, I love this question because I am by nature a researcher. And I think that's what really was the driving force throughout a lot of this book. If I'd ever reach a moment that I would feel like my imagination maybe has stalled a little bit, there's always research to prompt something new. And that's really how I was not unfamiliar with the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but I was also not as aware of it as I should have been. And so to come across those statistics and some of the family stories that I was able to read during my research was really stunning to me. And, I'm the mother of five daughters, and they were growing older and going out into this big wide world. And they're such capable, intelligent women, but I'm still their mother. So I was able to channel, a lot of my own worry just about the world in general and how women are perceived and treated and sometimes ignored when really we should be paying attention. And so that part of it was really interesting to me. But you can also see the research come through on other things. I have an endangered insect species that is in the book, plays a pretty large role. And so those kinds of things are really fascinating to me too. So I think probably all of my future books will have some research angles in them.
I would love that. Jacob?
Yeah, for me, my research mostly took place in the form of just observation over time. You know, I've spent my career in the tech industry. My book is set there, and a lot of the sort of richness of the setting or the details are just things that are taken out of my real life experience. And my sort of takeaway has been that outside of royalty, I don't think any group of people in human history has been treated better than the average tech employee. My wife works in hospitals, and at the end of every day, we would sort of compare notes, and it just reinforced how ridiculous my workplace was and the whole industry was. We had the whole office would shut down for 2 weeks during Burning Man, and you have like massage therapists and Prosecco on tap and all this crazy stuff all the time. So I felt very fortunate at the same, like I was very fortunate to be part of it. I also had worked a lot of other jobs before tech, so I was able, to maintain some perspective on it, and I tried to bring that to my main character, right? She,
So maybe this
yeah.
is the right time to ask you about the ice cream truck.
Oh, the ice cream truck was a very short-lived mistake when I was in college. Yeah, it's that is a good example though. I was basically just getting yelled at by kids because I ran out of SpongeBob SquarePants ice pops really early on during my shift, and that's all they wanted.
Tragic. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. But I've spent my career in tech while never feeling wholly of it, right? I've had a lot of other jobs, and so I was able to maintain some perspective during my time in it and kind of just accumulate observations. And I realized pretty early on the whole setting was so kind of over the top that it would make for a really good setting for a fiction story because it would feel larger than life.
Mhm. Absolutely. Karissa?
Yeah. So for me, like research was obviously really a big part of this. I did not set out like ever wanting to write a historical novel, and I don't know if I'll do it again. It took so much effort. I actually did a Fulbright where I moved to Taiwan to do some research. I wanted to interview some of the old soldiers who had fled to Taiwan and, had not been able to get back to their families. But by the time I got here, people were like, they've already passed away or they're, really old and not able to talk to you. So I actually, ended up interviewing a lot of younger people and, descendants of these soldiers. I did a lot of travel and I read a lot of like, research. Thank God for scholars. Academic scholars are amazing. Thank God for them because they have all the details that I would not know where to get. Um, and in the course of that, I learned all these really heartbreaking stories. Like one of the things that really sticks out in my mind is this story about a boy who, his mother had sent him away with his high school for safety. And, he was on a cart and he was saying goodbye. And his mother had given him a pomegranate for the journey. And he was like eating it because, it's a luxury at the time. So he's eating it. And his friend next to him is like, hey, look up, like your mom is waving goodbye to you. And he didn't look up immediately. And by the time he looked up, he had rounded the bend. And he later became a judge and a lawyer in Taiwan. And he said, I can never eat a pomegranate again because of that fruit, I never got to see my mother one last time. And it was just stories like these that like, in the course of my research, I was like, oh my God, like I need to capture that somehow, this feeling of longing. How do I put that down in words? And so while like, I was often mired in like the scope of like dates and details and things like that, it was really these anecdotes that I found in my research that really sort of grounded me and drove me to want to keep writing this book.
Mhm. I love that you interviewed real people for your story, so to make it so much more real, I guess. I'm guessing Laurie, you did as well. Um, Tara, how about you?
The research was pretty amazing, and people were really generous with their time, particularly with interviews, sharing. I was able to develop trust really quickly, which mattered a lot. And the research took on a whole life of its own because I immediately started authoring chapters for Project Censored, putting together interviews to air, and then became an accidental filmmaker. So the novel led me to the documentary film series. And, one of the women I remember talking with, she was telling me that when her father was killed, when she was young forces and she wanted to become a militant. And then she talked about her journey that then led her to taking up social activism because she was like, with more violence, it's just going to cause more people dead. And even when she became a social activist, though, it was like this rupture in her family where her mom didn't talk to her for a year because telling the truth and sharing stories carries such risk. And in that way, being able to fuse the research with fiction was enormously powerful, especially in a time where storytellers and journalists are being locked up for sharing the truth. And yeah, so it was a really powerful process. And I would also say sometimes it would be like I'd go down rabbit holes. So I would find out, I remember this one time I was like started in like really doing all this research about I read this article about somebody using leeches as a healing practice in the market. And so then it was like you go down this rabbit hole and then become convinced that it belongs in the novel. And then at a certain point, some of the research doesn't at all belong, and you have to just throw it out because you get really excited about this thing and it starts infringing on the story. And so I definitely would separate drafting from research, and you're either having research time or drafting time. And then when I'm doing drafting, I have rules against researching or even Googling something. I'll highlight it and come back to it later because you could spend a lifetime just doing the research. It's so interesting.
Mhm. I feel like I need to have like an uncut version of all of your books, like the director's cut with all that extra stuff in it. Just really quick, somebody asks, would you suggest any courses or seminars, creative writing courses or seminars? What would you recommend to a beginning author? So I thought I'll throw that out to everybody and see if you have any suggestions. Laurie?
I am a big fan of learning about the writing craft, and I still do it every day. So that's how I start my day. I've got shelves of craft books, and I read in those, and it never fails to prompt a new way for me to explore my own work or the added joy of them referencing another novel that I haven't read yet that I need to immediately read. So I would suggest there's a lot you can do yourself. You can tailor kind of where you might believe some of your learning opportunities are and find craft work in that area that you can study. But as far as particular courses, that's a really big question. But what I think would be really helpful is to be in community with other writers and writers who are resilient and willing to persevere. And not that everyone feels that way all the time, but you have to be able to suspend this disbelief that what if nothing happens after I put all of myself into this work? Because the work itself is really what matters. And every person can only tell their story in a certain way, and no one else has that ability. It's through your lens and your experiences and what you're interested in. And so, just by nature of that, it matters. And so, I would just say, write and keep writing. You don't have to know how to do it to start. And I didn't feel like even with the master's program and all the studying that I continued to do, I don't think I really knew how to write a novel until I wrote one. And so I would say persevere, start, just keep going.
Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I can say just for me, I do think that when I was starting out, I also like didn't know what I was doing. I felt like I didn't even know like the basics of how to write a short story, and those things felt very overwhelming to me. So for me, I took writing classes at Gotham Writers Workshop, which is based in New York City, but I know they have online courses. But I know that there are courses like that like throughout the country. I think Grub Street is one, and also like check your community bookstore or community workshops at community centers. I taught workshops at a local bookstore in Brooklyn one year, and I think just having you know similar to what Laura was saying, I think having community, but like, where do you find that community? And I think taking these classes sometimes is like a really great way to meet other writers who are starting out at the same place as you are and trying to figure out what that is. And I think that can be really helpful. Just to have, a beginning place and have people to chat with afterwards and be like, okay, do you want to share work even after this class is done? And there are writers that I have met through these classes that I am still friends with today, like 20 years later. So, I co-sign what Laurie's saying, like having a community is amazing. And perseverance is absolutely like the number one key to getting published. If I were to say anything, it's absolutely like don't give up, because if you keep writing, you will get better and you'll keep getting better. And eventually, that door will open for you.
So we have time for maybe a couple more questions. And this is one that I was going to ask as well from Barb. She says, I'm wondering if there are concrete suggestions that you would have for approaching publishing houses. It feels like a dispiriting and overwhelming process, so much rejection and tunnel vision. I've talked with authors who have decided not to use agents at all, but go to small literary presses. What's your take on that? So, Jacob, I'm going to start with you on how did you get a publisher?
Sure. Echoing Laurie and Karissa, perseverance was really the key. I first, I would also say that, for me, the thing I've tried to remember throughout the entire writing process, my entire journey has been just try to write what I enjoy, right? Like if I like the stuff that I am writing, I am happy, I'm enjoying it, and I don't stress over sort of where it's all going to net out at the end. Um, one of my friends is a stand-up comedian who's been sort of just doing it forever and ever, and he says the key is enjoy the process of getting better. And I've tried to just keep that in mind throughout this whole journey. In terms of concrete sort of story, I wrote a really long science fiction book that was atrocious, and like five of my friends read it, and I queried like 50 agents, and none of them replied, and I don't blame them. That was attempt number one. Attempt number two was I wrote a different book. It was a little bit more like a coming of age story, and it was much more in my own voice. I really enjoyed the process of writing it, and I queried a ton of agents there, and I finally got a couple bites and ended up signing on with someone. But that book didn't sell, right? So, it wasn't until Dead Money, which was really my third full novel that I had written, that I actually got the attention of a publisher. So, I don't have any, I'm the wrong person to ask for sort of good tricks for the publishing houses other than I've just tried to write what I love writing and just, persevere.
Thank you. Carissa?
Yeah, for me, I think what was really helpful was to start writing short stories and essays and get those published. One, because like I said, I think it helps you practice in some ways. It's a lot shorter than writing a novel, right? You can kind of spend maybe a month on it as opposed to years, and really hone it and get a sense of okay, like what's working, what's not working, how am I telling a story or not, and what is the voice that that feels authentic to me. And for me, it was also really helpful in another practical like publishing business sense, which was that, after I had been writing short stories and essays for a while, some of these essays caught the eyes of agents. And so before this book was even, finished or was in its very beginning stages, I had agents emailing me being like, "Hey, I saw you wrote this piece in this place and I really enjoyed it. And, do you have something longer that you're working on?" And so for each of these agents, I would say like, "Well, I'm working on something right now. Can I contact you when I'm ready?" And, some people I know like they get like very excited. They're like, "Oh my God, it's an agent. I have to like jump on this opportunity immediately. I have to send out something that's not even ready." And I always say like, don't do that. Like take your time because agents will wait. And so, between when my agent now first contacted me, she was the first agent to ever contact me. And when I actually finished the book, it was like 6 years or something like that. And when I was done with the novel, I, emailed her and like other agents, and then as well as like cold queried a bunch of agents and was like, "Hey, I am ready. Here is my like I have a novel. Do you still want to read it?" And, that's when I sent out my full polished novel that I spent years working on. So, I think that for me, starting out small has been really helpful in just sort of getting that experience under my belt and also just, getting those publication credits.
Mhm. Wow. Start small. It's a good one. Tara?
Yeah, I would agree with having short pieces going out because it's also good to just get that audience feedback loop going at times. I queried early on and went through batches of queries. I also co-sign on the community thing, so my writing community has been essential in the process, and I love it deeply. And a lot of times, those are the folks that'll connect you to their agent just because you get a connection doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere, but it helps. And so I had the manuscript read quite a bit. I did sign with an agent. She shopped it to editors, and the book didn't sell. She left the industry. And so at that point, it's like considered dead. So then I had another novel. I had multiple agents go through it, and then went back to my initial manuscript, Call Her Freedom. I wasn't good, and I was like just very privately writing, sort of to Jacob's point, like being comfortable with the process. And like Laurie saw, there was the Simon and Schuster Award. I entered it. I did not take it seriously. Didn't have a record even of the application, and then was a semifinalist. So got into, and then was matched with an agent. And also at that, and then it was interesting because all the agents, many of the agents who rejected me before then were happy to sign once the manuscript was in this state and I had a deal. So I had always thought I'd go with a small press, and that just wasn't the avenue that came to me. So I do think there is this perseverance, really being confident in your work. And I'm very grateful that this novel didn't come out 10 years ago. It wasn't ready. And so I do think there is something to, for the moment when your work is ready to meet the world and the world is ready for it. And you don't know exactly when that will be, but having faith in the process and conviction and a strong community really helps get you there.
And I just want to add that I'm really like, the moment is really interesting to me because I think there is a moment right now where more diverse voices are and stories are valued right now. So I do appreciate that this is the right time for your book to be in the world. Laurie?
Yes, I just so strongly agree with everything that's been said. And I would just add to that writing the book is the feat. And what happens with the book after that, aside from querying or reaching out to publishers, is really so out of your control. So if you're able to pursue that, but in a way that's sustainable for you, that allows you to retain your authentic creative self and continue to create, that's really the key for doing this long term. And everything's valid. I've had author friends who have had wonderful experiences with a small press, and I'm having a wonderful experience with a large traditional press. And so I think that wherever your book goes, it's such a path that's difficult to predict, if not impossible. But I think that's part of the joy of it because, I'm in my 50s, and how often does my life give me these brilliant surprises, right? And that's what this entire process has been, time after time. And the being able to connect with other writers and authors and readers has been such a joy that I didn't really anticipate this book would bring me. But if I had known, I think I would have anticipated this all the more joyously, because that has been my absolute favorite part of it.
Okay, I have time for one last question. Chris, I'm going to start with you. I know your books all just came out in January, but what is up next for you?
I haven't started writing the next book yet. I've been working on this book for over a decade. So I'm trying to, I was joking. I got pregnant while I was, writing this book, and then sold it right before, I gave birth, and did edits when I was 3 months postpartum. And so like my child is like a little over 2 now. And I was like, I've been working on this book his entire life, and I would like some time to just hang out with him and, live. And I think that, living is a really important part of writing. And so I'm going to give myself that, that space and that break to live a little bit before I write my next project.
I totally get that. Tara?
So I'm working on my next novel, and it's a coming of age story of a young woman who lives in Livermore, California, and her parents are both nuclear weaponeers. And she starts to untangle family secrets, and it goes from there in terms of her own family and how it intermixes with classified work and ultimately secrets of the town.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Lori, I know you said you know that you're having a second book come out.
Yes, and a third
And
actually. So I have two more books that will come out, and the second one is written. I'm editing it now, and I'll be sending that off soon. And I'm also exploring some screenplay ideas because I just want to write everything everywhere all the time. So that's what I'm sort of digging into. So I'm excited about that, and just looking forward to what comes next.
are you allowed to tell us the title, the potential title of second book?
We don't have one yet. So if I did, I would tell you I'm terrible at keeping secrets, but I don't know. So that's probably a good thing.
Okay, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm working on my next one as well, where my children allow. So yeah, same publisher, Bantam. So yeah, that's in progress right now, and yeah, looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Is it a standalone from this book?
Yes, I do think there's room for a potential sequel for Dead Money if that becomes, something um, viable down the road. But this would be a standalone novel, still set within the modern tech industry, though,
Hmm.
and still a mystery thriller.
Hmm. Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight. Like I said, I always learn something, and I really appreciate everybody's questions and thoughtfulness, and all of your insights and generosity, really, in your thoughts in helping us become better readers and maybe even some writers out there. So, for everybody who's been here, happy reading. For our authors, thank you again. And I look forward to the success of your current books and all of your future projects. So,
Thank you so much for having us.
absolutely super
Thank
fun.
you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Good night.
night.
Good night.